Hi, welcome back. So now what we're going to do, since you've been introduced to the Laffer curve, we're going to take a look at some examples from your textbook. So to do that, first let me start that over and share my screen with you. There we go. Okay, so we're going to take a look at the idea that as taxes increase, the deadweight loss increases, and that's really what the Laffer curve states. So let's jump right into it. Again, deadweight loss increases even more rapidly than the size of the tax. And what we're looking at to determine what is the right amount to tax, because there actually is a right amount to tax according to the Laffer curve, and we can use maxi-max points, maxi-min, and so on. But notice that tax revenue increases initially, then decreases. So what we end up with is a high point, and that high point corresponds to where tax revenue is increasing and deadweight loss has not overtaken the value or the benefit from that increase that we see. So let me go ahead and erase those. Let's see, clear. Okay, and let's move on. Okay, so here's some examples. In panel A, we have a small tax. Okay, we have a small tax here in A. Notice that the deadweight loss is pretty small. The tax revenue, or the blue rectangle, seems to outweigh the pink triangle in A. We then think that's such a dandy idea, let's increase the tax. Here we see the blue rectangle could be about the same size as the deadweight loss. And what we want to know here is, wow, which one's bigger? Because we don't want to continue to increase the size of the tax, because what we would end up with is what we see in panel C. In panel C, notice the deadweight loss is really large, and the tax revenue collected from that is really small. Another way to look at this is to come back here to panel A with the small tax. Notice how close we are to equilibrium. If Q1 is quantity equilibrium, Q2 is pretty close to that. So the tax that we're collecting on this particular product or service seems to be beneficial, okay? In B, it's kind of hard to tell unless we had math here and we could figure out exactly how much the tax revenue was and how much the deadweight loss is. To me, they look about equal. But again, here's quantity equilibrium at Q1. Q2 would be the quantity with the tax. Notice how far apart they are in relation to panel A. In panel C, we can clearly see that if quantity equilibrium is Q1, here is the quantity sold with the tax. Notice how far away they are, and I think it's pretty easy to see that the tax revenue collected here is not very much when we think about in relationship to the size of the deadweight loss, or this pink triangle. Okay. So basically what we do is we take a look at, and I want to do some annotations here. Here we have, sure, let's do it that way. We have deadweight loss, okay? So the deadweight loss measures how much is that triangle. So if I could just do a little drawing here, and we're gonna say, okay, so this portion, the y-axis, is measuring, oh, let me see if I can do this, how big the deadweight loss is. The portion down at the bottom is measuring how big is the tax collected, or the size of the rectangle. I should actually flip that deadweight loss over. I have it backwards, but I think you get the idea. And in looking at this, we want to say, okay, so what's the relationship here? We start off pretty small when we're looking right here, okay? Notice no tax, no deadweight loss. As the size of that tax grows, as we get to here, and particularly here, that the tax size increases at a decreasing rate, Okay, so we've seen this before. And so as that tax grows, what's happening is this deadweight loss triangle over here is getting larger and larger and larger to where perhaps over here, this could easily be representative of this portion of the tax size. Okay, so what Laffer did was in the next panel, and what Laffer did was he took a look at, okay, so here is the size of the tax. This would be your tax wedge. So this might be a really small tax wedge. This one would be a larger one. Let's see if I can draw that. There we go. And a larger one, larger yet still larger, larger wedge, and the largest wedge. And notice what happens, particularly at this point right here. At this point right here is where the tax revenue is actually decreasing. So if I were to take, and let me change up colors here. If I were to take a line and put it right here, this particular line would be that best tax to have. Okay, so right where that red line is exactly the best tax size to have in this particular scenario. Okay, let me clear my drawings and go on to the next slide. So this just talks a little bit about how the Laffer curve came into being. I think you saw that in the introduction to the Laffer curve, and then a little bit about supply side economics. I think what I'll do at the end of this page is go ahead and put some supply side economic stuff. Here's what you should take away. Okay, so change in tax revenue from a tax change depends on how the tax change affects people's behavior. And, you know, right now being a student of behavioral economics, I think we're seeing how people's behavior is really being driven by the panic with the coronavirus and so on. Okay, so next test over 7 and 8, make sure you do that adaptive test prep. Make sure you look through the video walkthrough problems as well as the graph builder to prepare for that test. And once you complete that test, we're going to go into our next section, which will be chapters 10 and 11. We do not do chapter 9. And we're going to talk about externalities. It's really an exciting time to talk about externalities, particularly because of the coronavirus. And so I might post a discussion, give you some extra credit there, where you can see how have negative and even positive externalities come into place during the coronavirus. Thank you, and I look forward to seeing you next time.